Well, good morning. It's Vlogmas number 6, I think. Yes, December the 6th. And this is Tommy Ellison coming to you from Alabama. And this is another semi-exciting episode of Vanity Stories. As I mentioned in the first Vlogmas episode, vanity cards are something that Chuck Lorre has made famous, and they're basically little signboards or advertisements crediting production and the creativity of the writers and the production staff. And in my case, I'm just using these little vanity stories to put little signposts about my life and history. Not that that means anything to anybody, but I hope that my grandkids will watch this one day if they have a computer and not just a phone, and we'll be able to perhaps learn a few things about my history on this big ball that we call Earth. So, in preparing all of this, I kind of realized that my dad was very influential in my life, and a lot of these stories that I tell in this series, and as well as my podcast called Remembering Dad, were about my dad. And so today is no different. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my dad and his opinions and attitude towards football, which was a game that I played as a young man. And Dad, just to get a little backstory here, my dad was born in the country, and he hunted to eat, and his family was not very well off. In fact, you would probably by today's standards consider them poor. They actually moved to Texas when he was a child looking for work, and eventually came back to Alabama and settled in a little town called Gant's Quarry, which is famous for Alabama white marble. And if you don't know what that is, you can go to Washington, D.C. and see a lot of the buildings there and the monuments were using Alabama white marble. It was a very white stone that was found in very few places in the world, and for whatever reason, Gant's Quarry near Sylacauga, Alabama, home of Gomer Pyle, by the way, Jim Neighbors, I guess that's his real name. That was his home. It was Sylacauga. But anyway, my dad did not play sports. See, I don't even know if he finished high school, to be honest with you. I don't recall him ever telling me that. He went to School of Hard Knocks. He became a law enforcement officer later in his life, and a deputy sheriff here in Alabama. And that kind of kept me on the straight and narrow, as you might imagine. He told me often that he would leave me in jail if I ever got in trouble. So there you go, tough love. But Dad was not a real big fan of football. He didn't really understand the game. He didn't know the rules. He didn't understand the strategies. He didn't really know what all the excitement was about, with this state having Alabama and Auburn and numerous colleges and, of course, high schools. And so when I began to play football in junior high, ninth grade, you remember that? The orange jersey, gold pants, red socks. You got to go back a few episodes to hear that story. He was just totally confounded by it. And there was a couple of incidents that I remember about him that just solidifies that thought process that he had. He always wanted to encourage me to play a musical instrument. In fact, he bought an organ for our home so that I could learn to play, and I was, forced to take organ lessons like I guess a lot of kids take piano lessons. And I was also a guitar player, and he was a mandolin player, so he really enjoyed our fellowship together with me seconding him on the mandolin. But he always thought that I should be in the band as opposed to the football team. And I said, well, Dad, what possible instrument could I play? They don't have guitars in a marching band, and certainly don't have organs. And they said, well, they can have an organ. And I said, how, Dad? How would you do that? You got to plug it in the wall. He said, well, we'll get a generator. And I said, well, Dad, an organ's big. How are we going to transport it around on the field, marching around, getting in line, staying in position? He said, that's easy. I'll just put it on the back of my truck, and we'll get the generator on there, and you can just play the organ while the band's playing. And I'm like, okay, Dad. I'll check with the band director and see what he thinks. No, wait, Dad, I play on the football team, so that's not going to happen. And that was just a story that I remember about him. And then, of course, there was a big game. We were very successful my senior year, and we were 9-0 going into the state playoffs in our division in football. And we were playing a team, Sachs High School it was, and they were up in the country, up in northeast Alabama. And the first game of the playoff series was actually played at their home stadium. They were the home team. So we traveled up towards Anniston, Alabama to Sachs High School and got on the field and was ready to play. And unfortunately that night, and I don't know, it could have been our imagination, but it just seemed like the referees loved throwing the flag on our team and not so much on the home team. And anyway, in the course of doing all that, my dad was getting extremely frustrated by the fact that we were being penalized so much. And actually, in the little rickety wooden stands that he and my mom were sitting in, he began to stand up and get a little bit vocal about the referees and the penalty flags. And this one particular moment in the game, at the end of the third quarter, it had gotten really bad by then. And so, as you probably know, maybe some of you don't know, at the end of the quarter, before they start the clock back for the fourth quarter to begin, they actually changed the direction of play in the field. So if you were moving towards one end zone, they would literally take the ball and put it on the same yard line, but on the opposite end of the field, and the team would go in the opposite direction from what they had been doing in the previous quarter. So the referee, as my dad was seeing it, was picking up the ball on the 20-yard line, going towards their end zone, and walking that ball all the way down to the opposite 20-yard line so we could line up and continue the fourth quarter. Well, from my dad's perspective, it looked like a 60-yard penalty because the referee picked up the ball and he started walking it down the field, continues walking past 5-yard penalty marker, past the 10-yard, past the 15-yard penalty marker, all the way down to the other 20-yard line. And he's screaming about it. What was that for? What was that for? And my mom said, Tom, that was my dad's name. He said, Tom, it's the end of the quarter. They're just changing the direction. And he sheepishly said, well, I thought it was a hell of a long penalty. And of course, everybody was laughing around him. But, you know, that was my dad. He didn't really have a firm grasp of the game. But I guess one of the funniest memories of my dad was the night that we played Jacksonville State University. This was when I was playing at Samford University. That's Samford, Samford, here in Birmingham. And we were playing at Jacksonville State, and Jacksonville was our arch rival. There was always a lot of big games between Samford and Jacksonville, and there was a lot of animosity about who was going to win the next game. And so this particular night, on a very muddy night, it had been raining all day. It was not an AstroTurf field. This was back before AstroTurf got popular everywhere. And we were rooting around in the mud, and believe it or not, Jacksonville State got beat that night by Samford University, and we came off the field and we were just covered in mud. And so we went into the locker room, and showered and changed back into our street clothes, and I came walking out, and my mom and my dad and my little sister and some friends of hers were there at the exit of the locker room where most of the parents had gathered and fans to wish us all well and congratulate us. And he looked at me and he said, did you get that money? And I said, what money are you talking about? And he said, well, when you came off the field, I was standing there and I put a $50 bill in your hand and shook hands with you. Do you not remember? Did you get the money? And I said, well, Dad, I promise I don't remember you doing that. And he said, well, I know it was you. And I said, well, how did you know? I mean, he said, well, I thought it was you. And in my mind, I'm picturing him giving the money to someone covered in mud, and it obviously wasn't me, but must have been someone my size, and there were a couple of guys on the team that would fit that description. And so I got on the bus with all the other teammates and sheepishly said to them, hey, did any of you guys have someone come up and put some money in their hand, like a $50 bill? And our big old offensive tackle on the opposite side of the line from me raised his hand and he said, yeah, I had some guy come up and put a $50 bill in my hand, and I had no idea who he was. And I said, well, Terry, that was my dad, and he thought it was me, so can I have the money? And Terry graciously, and maybe fortunately, gave me the money. And I said, wow, thanks, Terry. He said, well, I just thought it was some happy alumni congratulating us and passing out money for beating Jacksonville State. So there you go. Anyway, 3 stories, what I call the organ on the football field, the penalty, and the mud bowl. 3 quick stories, a little hat trick about my dad, and just little signposts, little vanity stories about my life. And I do appreciate you watching this on the replay, because apparently no one has watched it on the live stream, which is no surprise because I haven't yet to get a spectator on the live stream. I'm not even sure why I'm live streaming this. I guess I should just pre-record it and edit it and cut out some of the mistakes and the junk, and maybe even some of the stories. But I enjoy telling the stories, and they're for me. They're not necessarily for you. But I'm enjoying Vlogmas. This is day 6. I've been here every day. Where have you been? And I'm going to try to watch some of yours, and I hope you will try to watch, well, all of mine, but at least some of mine. Okay? Sounds great. Take care. See you later.